Donald Trump is now the president of the United States, and President Biden is set to leave from the east front of the Capitol shortly. And Robert Costa, because we're going to be spending so much of the next 4 years talking about Donald Trump, perhaps a moment to talk about how Joe Biden sees these final moments and his legacy.
Nora, I was with President Biden in the White House residence in August, and he takes pride in his record, what he has done to navigate Russia's war with Ukraine, massive spending on domestic policy, and he believes he has been a protector of democracy in his view of how the American system should work. But when we turn to President Trump, this was a speech of action. As the president told me over the weekend, just watch what I'm going to do. Stay calm. Washington should stay calm, he said, but just watch. On the horizon now is an overhaul of the tax code. Republican majorities, albeit paper thin in the House and in the Senate, pursuing a major package on the border along with tax reform, a total upending of many agencies and departments across the federal government, and a scaling back of the size of the federal government. You see the Trump family there. But this was a speech of action, and he explicitly detailed what he is going to do. And for people who haven't been paying attention to the campaign or to the transition, this was Trump underscoring, I mean business. Policy changes are coming, and they will be sweeping.
And just want to note that Hillary Clinton there and President Bill Clinton there are shaking every member of the Trump's family, despite the things that they have said about her. And I think it was, I'm told by people close to the Clintons, it was very important for them to not only show up, but to show the sort of graciousness that normally accompanies former presidents, and to make sure that they publicly support this peaceful transition of power. There is some news at this moment about those last-minute pardons by President Biden. So I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, we're watching lawmakers right now, Democratic lawmakers and others set to see President Biden off. What have you learned about those pardons?
Nora, it is not hyperbole to say that as the now former president was taking the stage in the rotunda, his White House was sending out word that he had issued more preemptive pardons, this time to 3 people and their spouses who've been with him his entire political career. His siblings, James, Valerie, and Frank Biden, and their spouses, saying in part that amid all the talk about political retribution, he felt it necessary to do this despite his respect for the rule of law. In the remaining moments of the Biden presidency, phone calls made by CBS News to try to figure out why he did this. And one source familiar with the decision tells me the outgoing president made it to pardon his siblings and their spouses just in the last few days, amid the, quote, continuing talk and concern about possible prosecution and persecution by the new administration. The source said there was no specific recent action or statement by the now president that prompted Biden's decision, and the source didn't know whether the former president's siblings requested the pardon. All 3 of them have been active in the now former president's political career. James Biden was his fundraiser in his first campaign. His sister Valerie famously was the campaign manager and then, of course, helped raise Hunter and Beau Biden after their mother died. Frank Biden, who served in the Clinton administration, all of them in one way or another have worked in lobbying or influence peddling in the last several decades. And there had been talk, of course, over the course of this most recent campaign that the Biden family, or as Trump and his associates called it, the Biden crime family, should face consequences for their alleged actions, none of which in any real way has ever panned out. He, of course, also preemptively pardoned his son Hunter, and we should point out, issued thousands of pardons or commutations to everyday Americans who had been seeking legal relief from the White House over the last several years. Biden will leave office having granted more of them than anyone else. But this 53-year political career now ending as he prepares to take the East Front walk, get on the helicopter, head to Joint Base Andrews for a final goodbye. Notable, he did not walk down the steps of the East Front. Remember, amid all the concerns about whether he can ascend staircases, especially in this tough weather, notable that he did not do that. Nora?
And it should be noted, too, the ages of both of these presidents.
True.
Donald Trump, 78 years old, now becomes the oldest president elected at age 78 and will serve into his 80s as well as Joe Biden, who is now 82 years old, just having had his birthday in November. And he will now join what is now Special Air Mission 46. It's only called Marine One when the President of the United States is on it for that final flyover of our majestic United States Capitol to see those final moments. And while there has been much accomplished in the Biden administration, even though the American people did not view that so, there were 17 million jobs created, certainly digging the country out of massive inflation that some say he helped with some of his big spending programs. There is much that those within the Biden circle hope that the long lens of history will show that he has achieved more than people give him credit for.
In one of his last interviews, Nora, he was saying he should have done a better job on messaging, letting people know all of the things that he had done and that he accomplished.
Every president says that. It's a kind of standard button they push. And, you know, some of that might be true if every voter had metaphysical certainty about the things done in your White House. But also it's very true in American politics and very hard that when the economy is against you, you can't talk your way around that.
And there was always 2/3 of the country thought we were heading in the wrong direction. But to Gail's point, too, I do think that the Biden administration suffered from an ability to communicate their achievements, not only from the principal level, but also from the staff level.
So what will he do now? We hear he's going to California. What will he do now?
Delaware has always been home for former President Biden, and he will return to Delaware. Loves Rehoboth Beach. It's a place where he made that decision to exit the presidential race. He'll also spend time in Wilmington, I'm told. He has a lot of connections in Philadelphia nearby. Family lives in the Philadelphia area. So he'll be in and around Delaware and Philadelphia, and will surely make his way from time to time back to Washington, D.C. What a political life for President Biden. And people close to both President Trump and President Biden have told me that these two men share a lot more in common than might be fully understood. They have both been on the public stage since the 1970s. They have been through ups and downs. They are at their core political survivors. And that led, I'm told, to a relatively friendly Oval Office meeting when they met in private. There's an understanding that they have both endured, even if they both disagree with each other.
And that we're just witnessing as the vice president, the former vice president, Kamala Harris's motorcade just left. And we are already getting a sense of how things are changing here in Washington and around the world. Margaret Brennan, I know you have some new reporting.
Sure, and a historic departure for the first female vice president of the United States, Nora. In terms of what's changing, we're already seeing our Camila Montoya Galvez is confirming through Homeland Security officials that all of the appointments that had been scheduled for interviews for asylum seekers, those seeking to enter the United States legally through this app that was created by the Biden administration to slow the crowds at the border and get them in through appointments called CBP1. That's already been just totally taken offline. So 30,000 appointments that had been scheduled for migrants to go through and have it actual legal process gone already. We are seeing changes in these executive orders that could actually create some questions about how does one legally enter if legal pathways are being shut down. This is something, Nora, that came up at the debate, if you remember, that you and I had with the vice presidential candidates. A campaign promise, once again, to do away with some of these things that the Biden administration put in place to deal with what has been a historic hemisphere-wide migration crisis with a crush of humanity unseen since World War II.
So, Margaret, are you saying people that want to enter the country legally can now have lost an avenue to do that? Is that what you're saying? Effective now?
Well, in the view of the Trump administration, they believe that the Biden administration's interpretation of the law was not legal, but they had created this pathway under their interpretation of regulations.
Yes, Senator Blunt.
Well, the traditional avenue for asylum was to go to any American embassy, American consulate, ask for asylum there. This idea that you can come to the border, say, I qualify for asylum and get in is very new. And there's a reason that we're walking away from that. It doesn't work. There's also a reason that in every European country with their border problems, that's been a huge issue in every election now for a decade. And we have to do something differently than we're doing. What we're doing is not working.
Great point in terms of not just the hemisphere-wide migration crisis, but it's really worldwide. You see it through Middle East, through Africa, moving into Europe. But in terms of the processing in this day and age, the poverty that exists for some people prevents traveling to the capital to go to an embassy. Their workaround was create that app on your phone.
Well, yeah, but living in a
poorest.
poor or dangerous country is not a reason for asylum. You have to personally have some unique fear. People all over the world will come to the United States if there's a way to get here for good reason, but you can't let we're the most open country in the world on asylum, and we have made a joke out of the asylum process by what we've been doing at the border.
And that would need to change through law, or what was just announced in executive order by Donald Trump.
It's a full conversation to have. Yes, it's a full conversation to have about the process and failures of the immigration system that have largely been the product of the United States Congress's failure to get something done for decades, even though multiple presidents, Republican and Democrat, have tried valiantly to do that indeed. And now we see the helicopter, known as Marine One, and the president is in it, is now Special Air Mission 47 departing. Special Mission 46 departing the east front of the Capitol as Joe Biden leaves Washington for the final time, ending a half-century career as a public servant. I want to bring in Scott McFarlane, who's there. Scott?
Standing in the footprint of this helicopter about to take off on the east front of the Capitol, it really is quite a closing chapter to the peaceful transfer of power. It was 4 years ago where the rioters first fought with police in this very spot, disrupting the peaceful transfer of power in 2021. It has been secured here today with President-elect Trump, now President Trump, side by side with President Biden. Watching President Biden board the helicopter for this aerial liftoff, this one-of-a-kind American image and moment on the east front of the Capitol. If you can still hear me, there are police and fire EMS workers surrounding this area taking pictures on their phones. And it feels something akin to a severe thunderstorm or small tornado in wind strength. The metaphor of a change in Washington.
I can't remember the year that I was there in that exact same position. And just to think about it. Just to think about how President Biden feels at this moment.
That's what I was wondering, Laura. And I wonder, do we know who else is on the helicopter, if anybody? Who else is on it with him? Do we know?
Dr. Biden.
He's about to pass by the old home place, too.
Yeah, besides Joel and Joe Biden, do we know who else could possibly be on that chopper? Because normally it's not just the two of them.
He's going to look down at his old house.
Yeah. I wonder what he's feeling and thinking, too, at this moment.
To fly down the Washington Mall, past the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the White House, and then on to Andrews Air Force Base, where I imagine he'll be greeted by other members of his family for that trip out to California and a vacation for the 82-year-old president. I want to bring in Democratic strategist Joel Payne. And Joel, while 49.8% of the country that voted for Donald Trump elated today, winning a popular vote about what's next, there are a number of people who voted for the Democratic candidate and voted for Joe Biden who are expressing sadness today and thinking about this presidency. What happened?
What happened is a big, broad question, Nora, and good to be with you all. I think what happened is Democrats fundamentally lost two discussions with the American people. One was the disruption and the norm busting of Trump, was that disqualifying? And also, was the return to normalcy that Biden promised and attempted to deliver, was that good enough? And I think Democrats lost the public discussion on both of those points, unfortunately, for us politically. And I think when you have a public that is very rambunctious and angry, and is disappointed and has felt like government and lots of institutions have failed them for years and years and years, you arrive at a point today where Donald Trump can ride grievance back into the White House. And I think that's what we're witnessing with this inauguration. That's what we're witnessing with the messaging he's leading with. And I think that's what Democrats will have to face for the next 4 years.